So I just want to welcome you all to the first installment of the Spring 2022 Speaker Series. We're really excited to start it during Charrette Week. It's kind of a special version of Speaker Series. A couple orders of business before we get to our speaker. For people in the room who need credit, we have Slido codes posted on many walls. And a quick note about after, we have a reception, so we will have a Q&A at the end of the talk, but if you don't get your question in time, Erin will be over in the senior studio to talk to people one-on-one. So we will have, we were promised hot cocoa and donuts, but we'll see what arrives. So I'm going to introduce a faculty member who will introduce our guest. So Todd Johnson, aside from being my dad, was and a slightly above average fly fisherman, was a practitioner for around 40 years as a landscape architect. He's an alumni of USU as an undergrad and got his master's degree at the Graduate School of Design. He has many other accolades that I don't care to talk about, but a couple are that in 2004, he was inducted into the ASLA Fellows group, I don't know, whatever. And he also helped found a firm in Denver called Civitas, and he served as one of the principal partners at Design Workshop in Denver for over a decade. And so, yeah, without further ado, let's bring him up and we'll get this thing started.
Thanks, Sam. If I fall down on these steps, I refer to these as the Widowmaker steps. So Erin can pick me up. Yeah, this is really about our featured speaker, and I love the energy that's in this room during the Charrette Week, and all the effort that you all put into this is generating a culture that is not unlike the cultures that our speaker's been to, and she's in the wheelhouse of her career at this point, and her name is Erin Clark. She is currently the Vice President of Development Master Planning for a group in Denver called the Urban Land Conservancy. Their mission is to provide affordable housing in healthy neighborhood settings, and to do that in perpetuity. So it means establishing appropriate locations in significant sizes, served by resources, healthcare, access to food, access to transportation, access to jobs, in a perpetually affordable form. That's not an easy thing to do. The Urban Land Institute constantly searches for opportunities in the Denver metropolitan area. So for those of you who are kind of urbanistically oriented, you know that cities follow suit from other cities. I would say Denver followed suit from Portland and Calgary. And I would say that Salt Lake City learned a lot and is continued to learn a lot from Denver. So a lot of things that were happening in Denver about 10 years ago are now confronting Salt Lake City. So we have the great honor and benefit of bringing a person of Erin's caliber to work with you all. From an academic point of view, she has a sociology degree from Brown University, city and regional planning degree from University of Southern California, and a law degree from the University of Wisconsin. I'm going to coin a new term. I'm sure somebody else has coined it. I consider Erin an actionist, not an activist, an actionist. And with those kinds of degrees and the complexity that you all are confronting in South Salt Lake, you understand the importance of knowledge and the sequence of gaining knowledge and experience that allows one to participate in really profound and complex public and private sector projects. And so, Erin, we really feel fortunate to have you teach us how to do it. I don't think you need this.
Nope, I have this one. Thank you so much.
Give Erin a round of applause.
Okay. Oh, good. Mic check. We're good? I haven't checked this one. As a singer, I do that, but not as a speaker. Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me here. It is an incredible honor, and I just drove in from Denver yesterday and enjoyed getting to see a lot more of Utah than I ever have before, and I would love to explore more, and I'm excited to be able to be here with you for this entire week. And so please know I've visited some of your teams. I'm excited to see the work that you're doing, and I am here this week because I'm only able to talk through some things here today, but I look forward to talking to you and your teams and one-on-one, and to be a resource for you throughout your work this week. But the energy, as Todd said, has been amazing. And if this is where we're starting, I'm so excited to see where we're going to end up. So again, my name is Erin Clark. Esquire. I added law to my passion for land use and urban planning. That is where I started. And as you noted, I'm the VP of Master Site Development for Urban Land Conservancy. That is a Denver-based nonprofit organization. We are in our 19th year now. And our mission is to preserve, develop, steward, and manage permanently affordable real estate to positively impact lives and communities in Colorado. We selected each of those words very intentionally, and I hope to expound more upon each of those throughout the presentation. But really note that word stewardship. I think that's critically important, and I want to come back to that concept throughout as well. This chart here shows my career path, essentially, as well. And as was noted, I started with a degree in sociology. I went to college not thinking that. I thought I was going to be a psychology major. I took Psych 101 and said, I am not going to be a psychology major. And instead, I found that having grown up in Colorado and then being on the East Coast, I just noticed that difference so clearly of kind of a Western ethos and being in our cars, and then I'm on the East Coast and I didn't have a car and I'm walking around, and I realized that I was interacting with other people in a different way than I had where I grew up. And not that one is better than the other, but I recognized the difference, and I was like, why am I drawn to that? And so I felt that I found urban planning really organically. I thought I had created this. I was like, oh, I'm really interested in how cities are built. And I think I can do something with this. And I was like, oh, people are already doing that. Okay, I'll follow them. And but I merged it with, so I like that I merged sociology with architecture specifically. It was that looking at systems and how people organize themselves and how we create institutions, but also the built environment, and how we design our spaces, how that either promotes more interaction, particularly not just within groups, but across groups. And what are barriers to those interactions? And are we building spaces that actually keep people away from each other, intentionally or unintentionally? From there, I went on to do work back in Denver, and then I got my master's degree in urban planning. And then I worked for the city of Pasadena, California. So I was in the public sector as a planner, but really doing special projects, and really found that it was important to help be a translator between here's the city's needs, they're looking out for public interests, and here are some of the private interests that are coming in to apply for permits and what have you, and how can we get them talking to each other and not seeing each other as an enemy? We all have a similar goal to see positive development go forward. How can we work together to get there? But I found that actually a lot of it was involved with law as well. So as the economy was having a downturn, I said, well, I'll sneak off to law school real quick and add that as a tool. And I consider all of this a part of the toolbox. So these are all things that, regardless of what your focus is for your team this week or what your degree is, when we're working with land use, with planning, with design, all of these things are involved. People and institutions, and working with communities, and law, and the public sector is involved, the private sector is involved because we're dealing with private property rights and who owns what. And then now I'm in the nonprofit sector and working across all of these things and in affordable housing. And I'm sorry, one thing I also wanted to note is that when I started in planning, one of our professors, the first thing he said was, as a planner, you're going to be jack of all trades and master of none. And I thought, why am I here to get a master's degree? I'm supposed to master something. I should be good at this thing. But I realized that really it's about mastering, trying to understand a lot of other complexities. That's what we do. We're there as this node to bring all these other things together. And so that's what I've really focused on and built my career as from that point. So I also want to first, because this is an equity-focused week for you all, want to ground us in some terminology. We hear a lot of initialisms and acronyms thrown around: DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what do these things really mean? And so I want to share my view of this and the lens that I'm looking through, and the title of this talk is specifically and intentionally developing through an equity lens. And that is because it's important for us to consider equity as we're working on developments and changing the built environment. But we can't develop through that lens unless we first develop the lens. And so I want to speak to that a little bit. This is, how many people in here have seen this image or something similar? I figured, okay. So I think this is important, and it gets shared when you have, in your workplaces now, everyone has mandatory kind of DEI trainings and things. The idea of equality being the assumption that everyone is benefiting from the same supports without acknowledging that, yes, we are all humans, we have that in common, but it's okay to acknowledge that we do have differences. We have different experiences, we have different physicality, and it's okay to acknowledge that. We don't need to be colorblind. We actually need to acknowledge those differences. The trick is to not then add extra judgments to the definition of those differences. So when we shift to equity, we see here, instead of giving everyone the same supports, the person who's taller, he can already see he doesn't need extra support necessarily. We're trying to see what the difference is in people's heights and what additional support could be provided potentially by others to help them all reach that same opportunity to see the game. But I think this last piece is critically important. Sometimes this image stops with the first two. What I think this week is about is the justice part of this. It's going that extra step to say, okay, we can help people to see over this barrier. But what if we pushed ourselves even further to take the barrier down in the first place? And we can't remove all barriers, but it's important to first see the barrier, acknowledge that it's there. And if we can't remove it entirely, can we make it lower? Can we make it more transparent? Is there something else that we can do? And so I think that it's really important and incumbent upon all of us to look out for those barriers to opportunity. What is keeping people from being able to live in certain places? And yes, there are things that individuals do that we get in our own way. It doesn't have to be either or. And it's not either individuals are messing up and that is the only reason that there's a problem here. What if some of the systems that have been in place, why has this area been developed this way? Why are people not able to succeed? And is there something we can do with that broader structure? So I also want to speak to the terms diversity and inclusion. This I have adopted from the Center for Legal Inclusiveness. This is an organization that is in Colorado, that is in the legal community, trying to really help law firms do a better job of not only attracting diverse talent, but keeping it. So when we look at diversity, that's when we're talking about its metrics. It's checking a box. How many, if we're looking at this room, how many people of color are in this room? That would represent diversity. But inclusivity or inclusiveness, I really like the word belongingness. Do I feel comfortable here? Do I feel like I can express myself? Do I feel like I can bring my whole person to this space? Do I feel recognized and honored? And so another way that people will often define diversity versus the belongingness is diversity is being invited to the dance. I've been invited into the room. But belongingness, inclusivity, is being asked to dance. I'm not just in the room, I'm engaging in the activity. And so I think that is really important for us to consider as well, is in the work that you're doing this week, how are we fostering a sense of belongingness in our development planning, or in the development plans themselves? But importantly, how are we fostering a sense of belongingness in the process to get there? How are we, if we're planning for a community, what have we done to get to know that community? What have we done to, how are we listening to them? How are we hearing them? And so I think this list here, I think, is really important. Meaningful participation, considering the whole person. Do community members feel a sense of belonging? Again, both in the process and in their community. Do they feel fully engaged? Are they being heard? Are they truly being included? And along with that, it's important to recognize that in all of this, the way to get beyond, we all have biases. That is human nature. So none of this is to say, don't look down on people. It is that it's about recognizing, where our own biases are and trying to take that extra step to move past it, to acknowledge it, to not give it legitimacy. And I like to note that, so I'm a Black woman. You can see that. There are likely inherent kind of social stereotypes that can come with that. And maybe even you hearing me speak right now is against some of the stereotypes that you might already have if you haven't, not everyone has been around a lot of Black people. I actually grew up not around a lot of Black people. And so I had Black friends in middle school who were like, oh, you sound white. And I was like, why are we racializing? What does that mean? And it really was very hard to accept for a long time. And as an adult, I finally did accept it because I realized, oh, Black people come in a lot of different ways. And what they weren't recognizing is that, yeah, but I come from a unique family where my grandfather and great-grandfather were doctors, and my grandmother was Phi Beta Kappa and graduated college at 19 and was fluent in Latin. That's not typical for most people of any color, but certainly not Black people from Indianapolis, Indiana, and Kentucky. So these are things that it's that type of just that extra check that we make in our minds about how we're looking at people and how we're engaging with them and not making assumptions. So what I really want to cover with you all is these three things that what we're looking to do is balance economic equity and social equity, having truly inclusive decision-making and development outcomes. And critical to all of this is respecting context and culture. The work that we do on these plans, and we're not doing it in a vacuum, right? These are communities that have long-standing histories. There are reasons that they've developed the way that they have. What can we do to truly understand that? And not just at an academic level, but really speaking with people. And how can we then take our training to translate what they want to see in their community, and we bring it into the professional realm that we understand and that we can communicate to cities, and that they can, and that property owners and cities can turn into policy and new developments. So I want to speak a little bit more about how equity is advanced at my organization. Urban Land Conservancy, or ULC. I read you the mission earlier and really focused on stewardship and permanent affordability. Our vision is for underserved populations, and critically those at risk of displacement, to be able to live and thrive within vibrant, diverse neighborhoods that have physical assets and resources that are necessary for individuals to enjoy a high quality of life. And I really highlighted the risk of displacement because I know we also use the term gentrification quite often. And that alone can seem this all-encompassing term. When we really look at the definition of gentrification, it's really about investment in an area that hasn't had it. But the way it tends to show up is racial and class-based. It's that there's not only investment coming into a community, but it's investment by people who weren't there before, who are then replacing the people who were. And so I like to focus more on the displacement aspect, not just the term gentrification alone. Because if we're investing in a place, that inherently is not a bad thing. That can be a very good thing. But it's about who's getting the benefit of the investment at the back end. And that is, so that's why I'm really focused on, are we displacing people so that we've invested in something and now they benefit from it and they built up the place in the first place. And then at the bottom here are some of our guiding pillars as an organization, as a mission-based organization. It is equity, inclusion, community, permanence, and environmental responsibility. So I'm going to go on to, I just want to show, this is, we need some of you graphics people at my organization because I hate this. But, oh no, that was recorded. But functionally, it shows, so this boundary that you're seeing in the gray, that is the very strange city boundary of Denver. But the blue nodes, the purple are transit lines. We had a lot of investment over the past 20 years in light rail, commuter rail, and then so the concentration you see in the middle is really downtown. So that's essentially downtown Denver. So we have a very heavy focus at ULC on transit-oriented development, TOD, which I'm sure you all are well aware of. And that is because when we're looking at affordable real estate, we're trying to look beyond just the home price, just what am I paying in rent or my mortgage. And affordable housing, I'm sure many of you know, most of you know, is typically defined, it's really a federal standard, and it's that a household is not paying more than 30% of their annual income on rent. And that includes utilities. But it doesn't, sometimes it can also include transportation. But we're really trying to look at that overall quality of life. So are we able to concentrate services and your housing and work and to keep people from having to be too sprawled? And so this is just, when we're talking about equitable development outcomes, what do we want to see here? I'll dig more into this when I give some examples in a moment of some of our recent developments. I start with site control and a low land basis. Site control, who owns property? So we're talking about private property owners. There are public entities that own property, right? There are housing authorities. There are cities and counties and states that own property, but also like a transportation management organization, a school district. So who controls the land and for what purpose could that land be used? And the low land basis is that when we're trying to get to affordable real estate, it's important that we didn't overpay for that in the first place. And you'll see how that shows up in some properties later. Locally focused design and needs assessments, really thinking about this neighborhood. What makes this one special? We can go to national and international conferences and we have ideas of kind of best practices for cities, but it's always important to take that and then not just superimpose it onto a community, but to really help to understand that local space. And then to form genuine relationships. And this quote here, this gets to what we're about to talk about with the first property, which is, and something I can't talk about in detail here, but I'm happy to afterwards or throughout the week, is community land trusts. The idea of basically mixing public and private property ownership, where there's private ownership of a building, but public ownership or nonprofit ownership, community ownership of the land. We generally, all of our private property is, you get all of the rights of that property. You have the building, you have the land, you have air rights, but sometimes there are people who can't afford all of that. If we unbundle that, we can help make it a little more affordable if someone just has to buy the building. And part of the reason, the philosophical underpinning of that is, I really like this quote, is that only a part of a property's unencumbered value is a product of an individual's personal investment. So imagine you own a home, and I think many of you probably are homeowners, and you redo the kitchen, you've added value to that house. But what you'll see in South Salt Lake and what you'll recognize regularly is that property values often go up because of other things happening around that are often public investments. If a new train line comes in, if a park is added, these are things that can create additional value for your property while you were just sitting there. And so how can we capture some of that public investment that's going into the private property, but still have it benefit the public? And so what we see here is that the rest of it, often the bulk of it, is a product of the community's investment, and equity accruing to the property over time because of public investment in necessary infrastructure, for example, roads, schools, utilities, and economic growth in the surrounding society. And I know Denver is one of these cities, or a lot of these cities across the country and across the world, where property values are just skyrocketing. Real estate costs are just astronomical, and so affordable housing is now not just for the lowest income, it's for our middle income folks, and we regularly talk about teachers and firefighters and police officers who can't afford these things, but all of the values are going up. How can we work against that a little bit and try to bring some equity to the process to provide that extra step for those who need it? So this is an example of some public investments in a local neighborhood in Denver that have really severely changed the economics of this area. This is the neighborhood of Elyria-Swansea. This is in North Denver. Right here is I-70. So the Denver Airport is this way. And if you keep going west there, you'll be in the mountains, and eventually you'll be here in Utah. So you'll see there are freight rail lines here. And I know I'm supposed to use my... And here in the yellow, this is a newer light rail line. So that's one investment where the Regional Transportation District, I believe here it's UTA, we knew years in advance that different rail lines were planned. This one was supposed to open in 2018. It finally opened in 2020. But that's something that people knew was coming, and with that, property values in the area went up, because this connects directly to Union Station and northern suburbs. This over here, has anyone ever been to or heard about the annual National Western Stock Show that's held in Denver? A few? So this is a huge event every January. It's happening right now. I was looking at the list last weekend it was a donkey and mule, there was some kind of show about donkeys and mules, and then and a lot of rodeos and activities like that. And this is a nationwide event. It's a huge deal. They have this complex, an arena, and then livestock. There's a lot of stables and all of these things happen, but that is an activity that is just January of every year, and otherwise it's dormant. And this is a community that you'll see it's largely lower density, single family here, and then industrial. And that's what it's always been. It was actually written up in the New York Times some years ago, 80216, and I live in this zip code as well, as the most polluted zip code in the country. There's a Suncor, there's a refinery north of here. There was a lot of just sludge, bad things in the groundwater underneath. There was a lawsuit years ago where there were payments made to the homeowners here to help them clean up their properties. This has been for generations largely Spanish-speaking immigrant community, Latino community, but you see that it is physically disconnected from the rest of Denver because of I-70 right here. And you'll see there's this large train tracks as well here. And so they're really hemmed in. But for that reason, it's also a very close-knit community. So the rest of us might drive there and be like, I would never want to live here. This doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel safe. This is their home. These families have amazing ownership and pride in their homes. And for those of us who don't live there and might not understand it, that doesn't mean, because we might not see the same economic value in it, value has different definitions, right? So I've talked about National Western Stock Show. This is a rendering of the redevelopment that's planned. The stock show was potentially going to leave Denver. Huge sales tax generator, huge economic driver for the city of Denver. The mayor was able to convince them to stay by promising. It's like when you build a football arena, right? It's like, we need you to stay. We were able to keep the stock show. Colorado State University is now a major partner. They just finished their first building. But this is the last number I saw was a $1.3 billion project and rising regularly. A lot of public dollars there. The train station, and then Central 70. So I-70 is running here. It's a viaduct. It's up high. It has bisected this community for years. It feels very unsafe when you're underneath it, right? Like you're under a freeway, and there are only a few crossings to get between the south side of the neighborhood to the north side. So CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation, they had plans, and they have now completed. They've taken down the viaduct and undergrounded the I-70 in this section for a number of miles. So we now have bridges that go across. And what you see here is a rendering of, it's a future 4-acre park that will serve as a cap over the freeway. So, but that is a $1.2 billion project. All of these things have come in. So the community that's been here, the residents here, even those who own their homes, even if they own it outright, they have no more mortgage payments. They now can't afford their homes anymore because the property values have gone up so much, that the property taxes have gone up so much, that they're struggling to stay in their homes. So that's indirect displacement. Direct displacement came in the form of CDOT acquiring 60-some homes in the right-of-way that they were going to expand the freeway to. So back in 2013, the city of Denver, their economic development office, came to my organization and asked us to buy that industrial property in red. This is a 6+ acre property. Again, it was industrial zoning. It was industrial warehouses. Martin Marietta was there in the past, and the latest tenant that was there was Atlas Construction Supply. And it's next to this is a metal, I don't know exactly what they do. I just know it's called metalwork. So again, all industrial around here. But this is a city park. This is Elyria Park. And right here on the corner is a city rec center, newer playground. This is a parking lot that is on top of a former municipal landfill. So that comes with some fun challenges. And then of course, here's the train. So we're 2 blocks here from this train. We bought the property, we had a loan from the city for 1.5. We came up with the other, yeah, they're 1.5. We are 5 million for the remainder of the property, or the remainder of the purchase price. We rezoned it in accordance with the neighborhood plan for this area, which called for this to be higher density residential because of the train, of the TOD aspect. And so it's rezoned with a maximum height for this first third, the southern third, of 3 stories, middle of 5 stories, and the back side of 8 stories. One thing I will note is that often with, and we plan for affordable housing here, often with housing, once you go above 5 stories, the construction typology changes and it's more expensive to build. And so, so we are actually stopping at 5 stories here just for financial reasons. These are renderings of the building to be in phase 1. So we own the land as a nonprofit, as you all see. We own this land. We brought in a for-profit development partner called Columbia Ventures. They are out of Atlanta, actually, because we have a lot of great partners in Denver and in Colorado, but this is a really complicated deal. We needed people who had a lot of experience, have their own property management arm, and have decades of experience, and were willing to take the risk with us. And so we had to go out of state to actually find this partner. They've been really great. So phase 1 is the south. It's a set, if you think of this site in quadrants, it's this southeast portion here. So this is a 4-story building that will be opening in the next month or 2. It will be 150 permanently affordable rental apartments. We say permanently affordable because we still own the land. This is a partner that is building the building. They own the building, we own the land. So this is not most land trusts are for home ownership or for single family homes. We use that model for multifamily residential and for commercial spaces. So this is all housing above, and then on the ground floor, what you see the image of on the left is a low-income health clinic. It's a nonprofit health clinic that has operated in this community and for this community for the past 25 years. So we started this process by putting out an RFP both for a development partner, but also for a community, or what did we call it? A community benefit anchor tenant. That was the plan from the start. So we had a nonprofit come in, Clinic Tepeyac. They needed to expand. They serve a lot of Spanish speakers, a lot of Medicaid recipients. They needed more space. They wanted to be able to, in addition to medical, offer dental services and a pharmacy. These are things that are not in this community. So, but they don't know real estate, and they've never owned or built out their own building. So we're there to partner with them in that. And so this is very complicated financing-wise, but happy to talk through that with people if you're interested as well. So this is low-income housing tax credits, which is what finances over 90% of affordable rental housing in this country. HUD program, low-income housing tax credits for the residential, new markets tax credits for the commercial on the bottom. What's important here is that access to healthcare affordable housing is also a social determinant of health. Knowing that if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, and you're like, I first need to know that I'm safe, that I have access to food, water, and these things. This is putting these uses in the same building so you know that you have a stable roof over your head, but you're not waiting to see a doctor. They're right there in your community, and for these folks, in your building. And so, again, 150 permanently affordable homes. The permanent affordability becomes because we own the land, and we have leased that land to the developer. So they don't have to worry about that land cost. That is helping to keep this affordable. I will also note the breakdown of units. So of the 150 units, half of them are serving households who earn up to 80% of AMI. Have folks here, do you know what AMI is? So, yeah, so AMI is area median income, and that is another federal standard. And then the other half of the units are all below 50% of the area median income. And what's really important here is that a full 45 of those are at or below 30% of the area median income. That's considered deep affordability, and we did that as well because that's what the neighborhood asked for. This mix started out very differently. It started with higher AMI levels. So all of this is technically affordable housing. But we met regularly with stakeholders in this neighborhood, and they were saying, this is great, you're saying you were giving us affordable housing, but it's affordable based on these metrics, but it's not actually affordable to us, to the people who live here or who have already been displaced or who are at risk of being displaced, because area median income is a citywide metric. So across the city of Denver, the AMI is much higher than it is in this neighborhood. So even when we bring in folks at 80% of the area median income, that's a net in-migration. That's new people. That to them is gentrification. That's going to lead to displacement. So we wanted to have a higher number of this deeply affordable level. And that has been very hard to do, but it's essentially using these 80% to subsidize the 30s. This speaks to those income limits I was just pointing to. So these figures come out every year. So for Denver, you'll see the percent of AMI is here. I hope my housing group is paying attention. Okay. So deeply affordable is 30% of AMI, and then it's by household size. So a one-person household, that means an annual income of $22,000, just over $22,000. So we typically look at a household size of 4 people. So 100% of the AMI, like if you make the total is 104,000. We're talking about serving people who make literally half that or a third of that. So this, I won't go through all the details of this here, but I do want to point out one quick thing, which is that, so again, we purchased the property in 2015 for $5.5 million. So I was wrong before. We got a $1.5 million grant, or loan rather, from the city, and came up with the other $4 million from these other sources. It's foundations, it's other groups. This property appraised just 5 years later at $16.6 million. 5 years. We didn't do anything. Nothing else was built. That's what I want to talk about. That is the public investment and just the wave of what's happening in Denver, and it's just becoming this hot place to be, that created that. That's not because we put a building on it and added value that way. And then what's also, I won't get into here, but I'm happy to talk about as well from an equity perspective, is we worked with the local neighborhood on a community benefits agreement, or a CBA. Typically, those are done before you're doing a rezoning process or something, because it's a community asking for, we really need affordable housing to come out of this project, or we really need jobs to come out of this project. And they're using that leverage when you as a property owner are going to get an approval from the city, a discretionary approval from a planning board or from a city council, that says they won't, be vocal and be against your project if you agree to these things. This is one where we had already gone through that phase. So this is essentially a voluntary CBA that we did. And it was to take the same obligations that we already had on this property. Because of our loan, I failed to mention that the loan we have, the city we have a covenant on the property which says that, and it's what we would want anyway, 51% of all of the housing that's built on that 6 acres has to be affordable to households earning 80% of area median income or below. A lot of properties, you're lucky to get 10% of the units to be affordable. We always try to go above and beyond because that's our mission. So we want, the community is saying, how do we trust that? You haven't made this contract with us. So we wanted to have an agreement, a signed agreement with local stakeholders that holds us accountable to for those same obligations, but that they're able to work with. And it also created a stakeholder committee. We have an ongoing committee that we meet with on a quarterly basis of neighbors so that we're giving them updates on the development as it's coming forward, and they're telling us about things that are happening in the community. And they're able to help keep lists of who's been displaced, help us get information out early about applications so that people can actually get a leg up. That's us adding that extra step to see over the fence. How can we help people to know about this opportunity, be prepared for it, so that their application is ready to go when this housing comes on the market? So I'm going to skip that quickly, and I will, I have 10 different properties, not in this slides, but happy to talk to you about a lot of different things. But I want to end with our gem of an acquisition that just happened this year, which is the former Johnson & Wales campus in the city of Denver. It's in the neighborhood I grew up in. I actually grew up 2 blocks away from this. This is a over 100-year-old campus. It started as the Colorado Women's College and then went on to be University of Denver Law School. My mother actually graduated from law school right here. And I was about 5 years old and watched her in her cap and gown. And then it went on to be Johnson & Wales University, which is actually based in Providence, Rhode Island. So I knew it from when I was in undergrad. And so they operated this 25-acre campus for 20 years. But they recently changed their plans and they closed the campus here and in Miami, Florida. Everyone was afraid. This is 25 acres in a neighborhood that borders a very wealthy neighborhood, and just blocks to the east and to the south, it is lower income, a lot of refugees. It's a lot of churn, and it's kind of very transitional. But this has always been kind of an open space for people. This has been an amenity for them. And so people were afraid, oh, there's 25 acres. It's going to be sold to the highest bidder. It's going to be all this dense housing, and we won't have access to it. Because of the way that my organization is structured and the way that we have been able to access capital, we were able to be competitive with market rate developers. And this appraised at about $80 million as a campus. We purchased it for $62.5 million in June. So fortunately, Johnson & Wales liked our vision for it and took a haircut on it, but and we did all this in 6 months. And we did it in partnership with the local school district and the local housing authority. So this is an aerial view, and we in November were top of the fold front page of the Denver Post for pulling this deal together. So this is the campus, and you'll see we've divided it into essentially East Campus, West Campus, and South Campus. So everything in the green here, that is owned by ULC still, or in this bluish. On the west, the green, that's Denver Public Schools. So Denver School of the Arts has a campus just north of here, north of Montview Boulevard. They've been there for many years, but their principal was concerned about lack of access for Black and brown students. This has become a magnet school for the region. They have drama programs, singing, dance, and writing and stagecraft, but they've been turning away over 500 students a year, viable applicants. So they needed more space. They saw that this campus was being sold. They recognized that they would want to expand and that this would be good to just be across the street, but they couldn't do the entire deal to take on 25 acres. And so they called us. I call ULC professional gap fillers. When there's a gap in the market and nobody knows what else to do, you call ULC. So we were able to put the deal together to purchase the entire campus and then simultaneously sell these 8 acres to Denver Public Schools. And then these 2 buildings here, these are residential buildings. We sold those to Denver Housing Authority. So they plan to turn these into permanently affordable housing for seniors. And then we own these 7 buildings and 13 acres. These 4 buildings up here, we're working with a nonprofit developer to turn into affordable housing for families and hopefully for teachers as well. This building, that's the beautiful historic building that was in the image before. That is now St. Elizabeth's School. It is a private school that actually has regularly had a more diverse student population than most Denver public schools. So that is K through 8 education happening here, grades 6 through 12 here. And then these 2 buildings, Johnson Wells, it's a hospitality culinary school. So these buildings had state-of-the-art culinary facilities, kitchens, walk-in refrigerators, all of these things that were only accessible to students paying tuition to go to that school. We now are working with we have leased those buildings to a nonprofit that runs something called Kitchen Network on the west side of Denver. They're now able to use, we bought not only the building, but all the fixtures, all the equipment is there too. The Viking ranges and everything. And Kitchen Network is now going to provide culinary education and business incubator options to immigrants and refugees on this side of Denver and in Aurora to our east. So I like to say that we have similar uses to what overall, there was student housing here, it was a college, there was education, there was a culinary school, they were using the kitchens. We have similar uses, but by changing the users, we're providing broader access to these buildings and to these uses. So with that, I'm going to end my talk right now, which I know has been too long. But I'm here for questions now, if we can take a couple, and then I really am looking forward to talking with so many of you about so many other things. Again, CLTs and land trust and financing, and I sit on the Denver Planning Board, so there's policy around zoning as well. So please, I'm happy to talk to you throughout the week, and thank you so much for listening.
Okay, anyone who has a question, I'll bring the mic over. Any takers? Great. Hold on one moment.
Okay, so I just have a question about so you buy the land and then they build the building. What's like the trajectory for like that? Do they anticipate like paying you for the land forever? Like, because you can't just pick up the building and be like, oh, bye, you know? Like, it's going to be there for a while.
Yep.
So how does that all work?
Yeah, so in a land trust, it's, like we said, it's separating the different rights that you have. So they build the building, they own the building, we own the land, and we're leasing it to them. So they have rights in the land, but it's subject to that lease. So we do that both so that they're not having to bear the burden of the entire cost of that land. They pay us a nominal fee, an annual fee, as a rental. They're a tenant on the land, essentially. But for operational purposes, they are operating as though they own it. They're responsible for, if there are property taxes, which there shouldn't be when you have affordable housing or something, that should be tax exempt. But if there would be property taxes, they're responsible for that. But the critical piece is that a land lease is recorded against the property. And so sometimes you'll have a deed restriction or something that says, on this land, it's restricting incomes to a certain level, and there's a covenant that runs with that. But sometimes those covenants can get missed in title searches and things. A land lease is important to us because it means that if there is going to be a sale, it can't happen without us also being at the table. We will have to know about it. And so it's another way of restricting. It's us saying that it has to, what is in this building has to be used for these types of uses. We keep that really broad. But they're able to put a mortgage on that building or to sell it to someone else. They just have to talk to us about it. So it's our way of maintaining that this is the stewardship piece. This is us saying that we put in this work for this land to be for community benefit. And we don't want it to then just be sold at some point and now it's back to the market, because once that happens, it's not coming back. Land is a finite resource. That's how we view this. And we also view that having control of that land is power. That's where the power is. And so we're just trying to be part of that process as well. And so that's why I'm focused on public entities, and that if you have that land, you have a higher responsibility for the use of that. And so by doing this, we're making sure that the building can change. I actually have an example of, we had a building on a land lease that was a charter school. The charter school went under. Because of the land lease, we were able to be the ones to negotiate with the lender that had debt on that building so that they didn't just sell it to anyone. We went through a community process, had a new nonprofit come in to occupy and operate out of that building. So it's the Center for African American Health. It's a family resource center now. That's what the neighborhood wanted. But because we still own the land, we were able to bring the community back into that conversation. And that's how, so the use can change. They could redo the building. All these things could happen, but it's a control on not exactly what it's going to be, but that it will be something that is for community benefit. And that's also so that there's a multi-generational benefit to it, generation after generation, and also that we recognize that community needs will change. So it's not locking in, it has to be this thing right now, but in the future, it can be something else, but we want that community at that time to help define what that will be. Hopefully that.
What happens if somebody's income raises, let's say they are at 80% area income and then they get a promotion or they advance economically? Can they stay or do they need to relocate somewhere else?
So that is a really critical question, and I actually do not, I'm going to couch this by saying I will start to answer your question and then I will put you in touch with people who can give you a better answer. We don't manage any of our own residential properties, so I'm on the development side of it. But what I do know is that we actually had a situation like that before I got to ULC in 2018 where they were just finishing up. So that's why I don't have the details, but I have folks on my staff who can provide that. Where that, if you don't have a gap, if there's no wiggle room there, if it's like you're capped at 60% of AMI, and yes, we don't want to, when you came in, that was your income. And so you qualified for the housing. But the point of these programs should never be to punish people for success, right? And that's to get to your point. That, yes, you should, that's what you needed then. Now you're making more. That doesn't mean that suddenly you can afford to go somewhere else either. So it's my understanding that the newer income averaging rules that came into the low-income housing tax credit program and the tax code in 2017 is what helps. So everything used to be capped at 60% of AMI. Now we can go up to 80. So if you make sure that the overall average is at 60, you can have some people that are above that. But I don't have a detailed answer for you on like what happens to a specific family or how those numbers shake out. But it is a recognized issue and is something that the rules have been changed so that, again, we're not punishing people for actually making more money at the time. At the same time, we can't have everyone in the building that is now at that higher level, because at the end of the day, it is meant for lower income households.
I'm going to take one more question before we wrap up.
So I just have a quick question. You mentioned that one of the 3 pillars for designing is just to respect the culture and the context in which we're designing. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for us doing that. I mean, I'm not sure about how other people feel. I'm not that familiar with the South Salt Lake area.
Yep.
I've been there, but I don't really know what the context is, what the culture is. If you had any tips or tricks for us to design with that in mind, but even though we maybe don't live there and we maybe don't know what the local culture is.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And that's a really thoughtful question. And certainly you're not going to be able to get that this week or, just visiting tomorrow. But I know but it is important we do get to speak with stakeholders tomorrow, right? So that is the one opportunity this week to apply some of this just in terms of the really listening to people. And it's mostly about not dismissing people for not understanding. There are times that I know early on in my career, I would walk into communities in Pasadena, California, and like Northwest Pasadena was largely, it's been a historically Black community for a long time, and that's where Jackie Robinson was from and his family. But they had a lot, what I recognized or what was taught to me is that there was a lot of distrust from that community they'd been promised a lot of things in the past that hadn't come forward. And I'm coming in like, yeah, but I wasn't there before. And I'm Black too, and I really want to help. And it's like, and so I get frustrated feeling like people were just kept talking about all the bad stuff that happened before. And I'm like, right, but I want us to move forward. But by me trying to focus on where I wanted to go without recognizing where they were coming from, I can't get them there. They're not going to come with me. And so I think that's really, like there's not going to be so much that you can gather in this week. But I think even pointing out where those gaps are. Like, okay, we're saying this, but if we were actually going to do this in the future, it'd be helpful if we also knew this, this, and this. Or here are groups we want to talk to. I think leveraging this work should not be about reinventing the wheel, ever, really. It will happen sometimes, but I think it's important to be looking at, who's here now, who was there before, who's at the table. And what you can get a lot of this week, though, is physical context, right? Is because a lot of people will look at their one property and be like, here's my goal, and I'm going to do all this on this property, and kind of not pay attention to what's happening around it. And so that physical context and are you connecting with it is really important. But getting to know who makes decisions, who is a leader in the community that doesn't have a title. It's not the mayor, it's not city council people. Who do people in neighborhoods listen to? Who is persuasive to them? So I think even just starting down that road is potentially helpful.
Okay, everybody, so 2 quick things we're going to do. Just sit tight. We're going to give Erin one more round of applause, and then Professor Dave Anderson is going to take the mic for a quick comment to students, I believe. So let's give her a round of applause.